What are some major misconceptions about Muslims? Should we fear them? Should we open our homes to them during these times of war? Can we justify war and violence through the Bible? Stay tuned to find the answers. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Aveli. Those of you who don't know what Aveli is an Armenian podcast. It's an Armenian Christian podcast. Today, we're doing the 11th episode of the second series called Christian Values and Conduct. Today, we will be speaking about standing with the one in pain, and we have with us Dr. Martin Accad. Dr. Martin, welcome. Ahlan wa sahlan.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Elia. It's good to be here.
Dr. Martin is the president of the Near East School of Theology in Beirut, Lebanon, and also he is a professor of Islamic Studies and Christian-Muslim relations. Thank you very much for being with us, Dr. Martin.
Pleasure.
Usually, in this area, in the Eastern Mediterranean area, Ramadan and Lent sometimes overlap. But this year, the difference was just a day. So this drove us to think about the relationship between Christians and Muslims and knowing our neighbor a bit better. However, maybe the audience doesn't know this. We have been experiencing war during these times. And having our neighbors indeed, we felt like it's a Christological necessity to discuss about our neighbor who is in pain. However, we were very interested in the beginning. Why would a Christian person, a believer, dive deeper into understanding about Islamics and about Christian-Muslim relationships? So what drove you to study deeper about this topic?
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all, for having me, and thank you for handling this topic, which is, of course, very close to my heart. I think that for someone who has grown up in Lebanon, from my generation, my most formative years, age 3 to 18, were during the Civil War. And despite how people interpret the civil war in Lebanon, you know, some people say Lebanon was just a playground for other great nations to do their wars on our territory and all of that. I grew up with a sense that where, you know, the whole religious discourse was very important, an essential part of the conflict.
Yes.
I grew up the first 13 years of my life in what was known at the time as the West Beirut.
Okay.
So Muslim majority side of Beirut.
Yes.
When we had, for practical reasons, to move to the other side, to the so-called Christian side of Beirut, I realized that my new Christian friends talked about Muslims as if they were aliens. And so for me, that was not at all my experience while growing up. If there is such a thing, if anything, while growing up, what I experienced was Christian bombs, Christian shells falling on our side of town. So I didn't at all have this feeling that, you know, I'm a Christian and my enemy is the Muslim.
Okay.
So I think it's the sense of the importance of religion as an essential part so often in conflict. And through history, religion has played such an important role, or such a central role, more in conflict than in peace.
Yes, unfortunately.
For me, this became a subject of curiosity and passion for exploration. For me, I hear the call to prayer from the mosque. I don't feel anguish or anger or fear or anything like that. I have almost a sort of nostalgia, you know, because these are the sounds of my childhood.
Yes.
So for me, the motivation was curiosity, wanting to learn more about Islam. But also I realized while I was doing my studies at the Near East School of Theology in the 90s, I realized that a lot of the conversations I was having with Muslims was very repetitive. You know, when we talked about religious stuff, when we talked about Christ, about God, things often became circular. I shared an idea, they would respond to me in a certain way, I would respond to them. And I realized our conversation is always the same.
Yeah.
It's as if we've inherited arguments and responses to arguments and all of that. And that made me want to explore the history of Christian-Muslim dialogue, the history of Christian-Muslim conversation. And that's what I ended up studying.
Were you curious more about the other religion, about Muslims or Islam, or were you curious more about building peace, how to build peace and how to build dialogue?
Well, both. I wanted to contribute to peace in society. I'm someone who can't stand by and be
watch and
a
be
spectator.
passive.
Many people, I think, are like that. You have to be part of the future of the society, of the community you're a part of. And so wanting to be an agent of peace for me just automatically meant, well, I need to learn more
yes.
about this quote-unquote other, and in order to be able to communicate better with Muslims.
You said that when you were in the west side of Beirut, you didn't feel any threats, even though you were within a Muslim living community. And then usually, sometimes people think whenever they hear the word Muslim or Islam, the automatic feeling to it is fear. What are other misconceptions about Muslims?
Well, many misconceptions. I mean, my memories of childhood was that my father was a pastor, and we lived in a building that basically had mostly Muslim neighbors in the Hamra area of Beirut. And whenever bombing started, our neighbors used to come to us. I don't know, maybe there was some sort of sense of peace in our home. My father brought out his guitar and sang worship songs, and our neighbors would join in, and we would pray, we would read the Bible. That was a very natural way of relating and of finding solace and finding shelter together in God.
That's a beautiful testimony.
Yeah. So that's, for me, kind of challenges the presupposition or the assumption that you mentioned that Muslims are dangerous or frightening or violent. I would say there are two broad areas of misunderstandings or prejudice that we have as Christians towards Islam, and not only as Christians, by the way, but generally non-Muslims towards Islam. One is we generalize, and so we miss the diversity that exists in Islam. Another thing which I would call complexity. So the diversity and the complexity. Yeah, the complexity is that Islam, like any other religion and like any other ideology, has multiple layers. It's not only about private faith practice. And there's a sociological aspect to it. There's a political aspect to it. And so you have to understand the multiple layers of Islam. And again, I want to make sure I emphasize not only about Islam, but now we're talking about Islam.
Yes.
The other thing is the diversity. Who decides what is Muslim and what is not? What is Islamic? What is not? There's a Muslim scholar who wrote a book entitled The Importance of Being Islamic. What is Islam? The importance of being Islamic. And he basically says that anything or anyone that claims to be Islamic should be taken seriously. That means if someone believes that they are inspired by Islam to make peace in society, to be hospitable, to be welcoming, that is an expression of Islam.
Because Islam in itself, the word means peace, right?
That is often a concept that is quite widespread these days. But I have to say, as someone who has studied Islam through history, that it's a fairly new concept. I would say it's a post 9/11 concept where Muslims in the West have had to be defensive
themselves, yes.
about, and so they say Islam comes from salam, which means peace. Now, Islam, in linguistics, we would say the word Islam is a cognate. It's a parent of the word salima, of the basic root salima.
Does it mean surrender in this
It
point?
can mean both. So the root salama, the three letters, like all Semitic languages, every word comes from a verb that has three letters.
Okay.
And so the verb salama can be salima, salama, and then it derives into sallama, aslama, okay? And so the root can go in the direction of peace and can go in the direction of surrender. And surrender can be viewed as something positive. I surrender myself to God. Even I personally think it comes from Abraham, where the Bible itself says, and he surrendered to God, and it was considered for him as righteousness.
Yes.
But politically, it has also meant, Christians, unfortunately, in the Arab world often have this formula in their mind, aslim taslam, become a Muslim, you'll be safe. And in a threatening way, not in a way that, So if you become Muslim, you'll be okay. If you don't, your life is at risk. This is unfortunate, of course, because surrender can be a beautiful thing, but it can also be something you impose on an enemy.
Yes,
So
could be a dangerous thing.
this is a great example, actually, about what I'm talking about, the diversity and the complexity.
Yeah.
Even the word Islam is diverse in meaning
And complex.
and is complex, multi-layered.
You gave a wonderful story, a testimony about when your father used to play the guitar, and there was peace in your home with Muslim friends, and your father being a pastor. When I was in grade 10, after my brevet, I had to go to public school. And in public school, we went to the same public school, 5 girls from the same class from an Armenian school. And four of them were in one class, and I was alone in a single class. And, not so fluent in Arabic back then. I am very well now, I must admit. And then for me, it was a whole new world. There were the Muslims, and I realized then that there's the Shia, the Durzi, and the Sunni, and then I realized that there even Christians were divided. And for me, it was an eye-opening experience. The wonderful thing that I remember from that experience is that when it was Lent time and Ramadan time, we used to fast with each other. It began with the Lent. The Lent was first. So when it was our Lent time, none of our Muslim friends actually ate or drank anything with us until it was the time for us that we could eat. And when it was Ramadan, because they were so supportive of us and they were so...
Solidarity, empathetic.
Yes. They took it so seriously. So us Christians, we had to respect their fasting as well. So we didn't eat anything until... Well, not until, because then it was very late at night. But for me, it was such a beautiful moment. When you talk about nostalgia, I think about those memories of mine, of how we were truly living together. We were fasting with each other. And then how I found the same values that I had in people who were not Christian at that time. In people, there was one of my best friends was a Shiite girl, and then there's a young man who I'm still in touch with. So it was a very different, eye-opening experience for me. And that's why you said that this topic is close to you, to your heart. I'm so happy that I'm having this podcast today as well.
It's a wonderful experience and story. I remember also often fasting Ramadan with my friends, and this is quite a unique experience for Lebanon, I think. And we have to also be conscious of that. In the past 20 years, since I've been teaching Islamic Christian-Muslim relations, I've had a lot of students not from Lebanon. I've had students from Syria, from Jordan, from Palestine, from Egypt, from Sudan, and other parts of the Arab world. And I realized that our experience in Lebanon is quite unique. Unfortunately, I've discovered that, for instance, for Christians in Egypt, life is much tougher. Opportunities in life, because they are Christian, are much more limited, and their experience of neighbors is not the same as I've had. In places recently where there's been conflicts with ISIS and other group like that, I've been hearing in disbelief. It's been hard for me to believe, but unfortunately, it seems that many Christians who lived with their Muslim neighbors for decades, suddenly when ISIS took control of an area, they have neighbors that turned against them and harmed them. For me, this is unthinkable, because my Muslim neighbors have always been hospitable, have always embraced us, protected us. But it seems to be true, sadly, and I think that's why we need, as Christians who understand diversity and complexity, to find allies within our societies from all different trends of life, and together work towards peaceful societies. And I think that's very important, and we have to oppose extremism which is justified on the basis of religion.
So if I want to just paraphrase what you just said and summarize, what you're trying to say, that Lebanon is a unique situation, and also in all people, Muslims or non-Muslims, Christians or non-Christians, all religions, there are people who are working towards peace, and there are people who are not.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Do you want to discuss more about other misconceptions about Muslims, or do you think that we talked about it enough?
I think just emphasizing that the multiple layers, that's the complexity, and then the diversity. And so there are very diverse expressions and manifestations of Islam. And just like I don't want to demonize Islam by saying Islam is all violence, Islam is all extremism, I also don't want to fall into the other extreme and say
it's completely safe and it's okay and there's no danger. Yes,
Islam means peace, and that's what Islam has always been about, and all of that. Here's how I see it: when a Muslim tells me my religion inspires me to be hospitable and kind and loving and peaceful, I accept that and I believe him. And I say, wonderful, and let's see how we can work together.
Yes.
When a Muslim tells me the only true Islam is Islam that imposes religion because it is the true religion, it's the religion of God, and the whole world has to become Muslim, and so all of that, and God has ordered us to fight non-Muslims, I accept that as well. And I say, well,
I believe it.
Yes. I accept that this is his experience and the inspiration that Islam has given him. It doesn't mean that I accept this behavior, okay? But what I want to do is I want to ally myself with the first in order to try and
influence
model,
the rest.
model something different that religions can do together in partnership. Because I recognize that we have the same problem. I recognize that throughout history, I'm a historian, so I realize that throughout
Christians
history,
have killed
each other and others,
Yeah.
and we think, yes, but they did it, but it was not aligned with the teaching of Jesus. Well, surprise, some of them preach sermons based on Jesus's teaching, not the Old Testament,
Yes.
to justify war
Yes,
in the
they
name
do
of
that.
Christianity.
We do that. We are guilty of that.
That has happened during the Crusader period, during the Reconquista, during the Iraq War. It has happened. It is happening right now with Christians, quote unquote, saying that what is happening now with the Palestinians in Gaza is justifiable biblically.
Yes.
And so it's a matter of interpretation, and our challenge is a challenge of interpretation. And that's why we need to engage in conversation. As Christians who believe that the Bible inspires us for peace, it is our responsibility to deal with our extremists. And I say this to my Muslim friends. I say, you cannot say ISIS is not Muslim. ISIS is your problem. It's a problem of interpretation. If you don't make ISIS your problem, I'm not going to make the Christian Zionists my problem.
Okay.
But
also, a Christian person cannot correct, for example, an extremist in a Muslim group. Perhaps acceptance from different groups of people from the same religion is much more acceptable than from the other religion, perhaps?
Let's say we are primarily responsible for our own extremists.
Yes, that's fair enough. As believers and as people who are now experiencing war, this fear, misconceptions, perhaps assumptions, not even misconceptions. So people are now confused. The non-Muslim community now is confused. Of course, the Muslim community is confused as well because of especially the Shiite Muslims, because of the war. I remember when this happened a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, all homes and Christians their arms were open and they were ready to accept Muslims into their homes and to take care and help and empathize and support. However, this year, the way I'm getting data is that some people are not as willing to help Muslims or these group of people, our neighbors in pain, because they're just fed up. So now my question is, as believers, as followers of Jesus, what should we do? If a person is fed up, this person is fed up probably because he is experiencing the same trauma and war. He's tired of the entire situation. Sometimes there's a lot of blame, and we cannot say that this negative feelings and connotations are not justified. So we have that, but then also we have the Bible telling us to love our neighbor, to protect our neighbor, all the way from the Old Testament to the New Testament. So between doing nothing or wishing the worst for the neighbor in pain, and between opening our homes to them, what should a Christian or a follower of Jesus be doing?
Yeah, it's a very complex issue. Let me put a theological foundation first, and then we'll get into the practical sides of it. Theologically, the concept of hospitality is absolutely fundamental to our faith. And it's wonderful because hospitality is such an important part of our culture. I think hospitality is very fundamental to the Christian faith because the whole concept of the incarnation is based on the idea of hospitality. God deciding to meet us, to encounter us in where we are in the gospel. One of the names given to this newborn Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. God with us is an amazing expression of hospitality. And it's not only, God didn't send us an invitation to heaven to come and meet him. That's not the sort of hospitality. It's also being a guest.
Yes.
Okay, and so God comes to us, experiences our hospitality. So that's fundamental to how we need to think about this. Then we come to the practical side of it. So there's no alternative to being hospitable if we are followers of Christ. That's number one, and that should have something to say to all the issues of immigration and all of these things, and the fear of the stranger that we see so much around the world these days. In Lebanon now, there are many sides to this story. As you said, there is a reason why some Christians are afraid. Not only Christians, by the way, but we have a community which is being targeted, in general, a Shiite community, but very specifically members who belong to groups that Israel is targeting in Lebanon. So we have reason to have concern. If there are infiltrators from those groups that are living in a building, living in an apartment, living among us, this is not a theory. They are actually being targeted. They are being assassinated. So we're afraid, of course. We want to make sure that we're not hosting somebody that could become a harm to our family and our community.
Yes.
Entirely justified, and we need to be very vigilant about that. Okay. But that's not only us as Christians. The Sunnis and indeed the Shiites who are not part of those groups have also the same concern. But it cannot become an excuse for us to be lazy about hospitality and about our responsibility towards our neighbor. And once we address this concern, then there's no justification for not opening our hearts, opening ourselves, and going out to our neighbors. There are practical matters also, for instance, if you have a school or a university, you may be thinking, well, I don't want to have my building full of refugees, and what happens when I need to have a class? So we have also responsibilities, but we have to do everything we can to make sure that it's not possible, but if at all possible, nobody remains on the street.
Yeah.
Thankfully, this year also the government of Lebanon has been much more responsible, has taken up a responsibility for sheltering, for feeding, for healthcare and all of that, so that we can be partners with the government instead of feeling like we're constantly doing the work of the government.
Yes.
But we have to be constantly looking around. We have to see our neighbors. We have to see the pain. We have to see those who are suffering and see what their need is and how we can be part of a solution for them.
One of the practical ways that Nest has been dealing with this is the initiative Neighbor to Neighbor. Would you like to share a few moments about it?
It was very, very, very simple. A couple of people from Nest walked around, so that there were so many refugees around us. They walked over to the shelter that's just around the corner from Nest. First suspicious attitudes toward them, but then, they started talking to the women, to the men who were there and so on. And they realized that one of the greatest need is their children and youth are hanging out all day doing nothing. We're a seminary. We have a program in Christian education.
Yes.
We are people who are called to ministry. We said, well, this is something we can very quickly do. It's not costly. We want to prepare activities, and we'll come and spend time with the kids and youth. And that's what we've done. Overnight, somebody came up with the name Neighbor to Neighbor. A friend designed the logo. The next day we printed shirts.
It was very fast. I'm a Nest student, and I didn't know. I just saw the pictures on Facebook, and I was so proud.
Yeah. The next day we printed, T-shirts with Neighbor to Neighbor on them, the logo.
The vest. And I'm like, why am I not in that picture?
Well, we have a T-shirt for you if you like.
Thank you.
And since last week, we started going twice a week with different groups. groups, different students. Everybody wants to be part of it. So that group goes and spends about an hour and a half with the children and youth, and then we come back to Nest. And,
Yes. Also, the Union of the Armenian Evangelical Churches, we have something called the Crisis Management Team. Last year we did, and we often... I'm proud and happy that we are active when Lebanon needs help or any neighbor needs help.
Yeah.
I can't believe we're at our last question. So for us, for Christians in Lebanon, the context, as we can see, is a bit different from non-Muslims or Christians outside Lebanon. Sometimes wars are justified through biblical scriptures. Violence is justified. You already mentioned something small about that, but maybe you would like to develop this idea. What would you like to say about this topic?
Well, violence justified in the name of religion, and here in particular on the basis of the Bible, is one of the oldest heresies in Christianity. You know, Peter, the apostle, wants to defend Jesus and cuts the ear of the servant of the temple. And we know how Jesus responded. Immediately intervenes, orders him to put his sword back in the sheath, and he puts his hand on the ear and heals it.
Yeah.
And that is our role if we are followers of Jesus. That is our theology, the theology of Peter before the resurrection, where he wanted to defend Jesus, is a heresy. We need to understand that. Any justification of violence in the name of religion is absolutely unacceptable. I tend to be a pacifist, but I can accept that people from a community decide to defend themselves against an aggressor. But the moment they want to justify this based on religion, then I have a very serious problem with that. We can justify it in the name of humanity, in the name of taking care of our own, in the name of having responsibility for our loved ones, but we cannot do that in the name of religion.
We're done for today. I thank you so much for being here and having this discussion with me.
It's been a pleasure, Alien. Thank you.
This is your moment to have a word from the heart with the audience. So we would like you to look at your camera and share your thoughts.
Well, one thing that I didn't mention is the whole dynamic of minority-majority. As Christians in this part of the world, whether in Lebanon or other countries, we always feel like we're small, we're a minority, we're being oppressed, we have no future in this part of the world. What I want to say is once we understand the diversity and the complexity in every religion, including Islam, then we realize we can actually be part of a majority. That majority is the large group of people who view their faith as an inspiration to be hospitable, to be loving, to be peaceful. And as Christians, we want to ally ourselves with those people. And then suddenly we become the majority in society, the majority of the population. And together we can work against or to oppose those who want to use religion to be as an inspiration for violence. And so once we've have this paradigm shift, once we see ourselves as part of a majority that is strong, that is motivated, then we can really begin to make a difference in our society. We're not a minority. We're not being oppressed. We have a future in this part of the world. We don't need to run away. Your allies are all around you. Ally yourself with those who want peace for society. And in this time of war, in this time of great displacement, ally yourself with those who want to bless, to be hospitable, to do good, and to be peaceful, and make a difference in your neighborhood first, in your country, and in the world.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Ladies and gentlemen, when Jesus was asked what is the greatest commandment, he said, love your God with all your heart and mind and soul. And then he said, love your neighbor. Whatever you're feeling, you are justified. We can in no way tell anybody how to feel about a certain topic. However, as Christians, we are invited to love and be the image of God and bring His kingdom into this world. I would like to ask you to share this podcast, subscribe and like so that our voice may be heard over and over. I'll see you next time with a different topic. Bye.